I mean, the ecosystem is really thriving because you can see how generative AI can be used in almost all aspects and start transforming the way we do work, the way we live, the way we play. And
Yeah.
so for marketers, I think if you're not using it every day, you better start using it as much as you can and to explore how can we really transform the way we work, and don't use it like a glorified search engine. Really think about the work that you would completely change the way you're doing things today if you have this incredible tool at your disposal.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Li. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm super excited to be chatting with Charlene Li today about the next generation of marketing, some of which will be powered by AI. Before we delve into that, Charlene, I'd love to have you talk about your latest book a little bit and what the catalyst was for you deciding you needed to write that book.
We're talking about the disruption mindset.
Yes, disruption.
Yes. Yeah. So I wrote that book back in 2019, and people kept asking me, so you talk about disruptive transformation. How do you be disruptive? How do you create disruption? And I didn't have a really good, solid answer for that. So I got curious and started to do research, and a book popped out after about 5 years. And so it's been a passion of mine to understand what is it that makes some organizations able to disrupt themselves and transform themselves while others have a really hard time with them.
Yeah, well, there was that book, The Innovator's Dilemma, which was trying to get to the root of some of that same challenge. Do you feel like you need an entrepreneurial mindset both within an organization or external to an organization to be a disruptor, or do you think people can sort of follow a playbook to be a disruptor?
I think there's a playbook. I don't know if it's so much an entrepreneurial mindset that you have to go out there and break things and you got to be a garage, in a garage or something. The one thing that disruptive organizations and entrepreneurs share is a vision of what's possible in the future. They have a really good idea who the future customers might be, and therefore do everything possible today to be able to meet the needs of those future customers. And by default, entrepreneurs have to do this because they don't have any existing customers. So they have no choice but to go for future customers because their competitors and the original people in the market already have the current customers locked up.
Right.
So they can go headstrong against them or try to find new opportunities, new markets, new customers, and or pick off the ones that aren't being well served by the incumbents. And that is what Clay Christensen pointed out, is that he didn't believe that the incumbents could do a good job because they were blinded by their profitable customers. And that's the one thing that these disruptive organizations do, is they put on those disruption sunglasses so they can block out the glare from their beautiful existing customers. And so they can see the dim light of these new future customers off in the distance.
Very well. It's a perfect segue into the topic we wanted to talk about, which is AI and the disruption that might have on organizations if they don't find ways to embrace it as a tool or transform themselves around it. We'll both be at the Techonomy conference in Orlando shortly, talking about that from various perspectives. So, let's talk about the transforming of marketing through AI and what some of your points of view are on that.
Sure. Again, generative AI is incredibly powerful at generating content. So text, audio, video, images, it's just amazing at it. You can do it better, faster, with greater quality and assuredness than you can individually. So I think anything that's facing customers, anything that requires content is going to be transformed by this.
Absolutely. Of course, like the force can be used for good or evil. And there's a lot of folks already seeing some evidence of all forms of spam, right? You certainly have content spam on the web, either making its way into MFA sites made for advertising, made for AdSense sites. You've got spam into email inboxes, some of which is getting more clever, both from a phishing perspective, but also from a marketing perspective. And then, you've got other forms of sort of spam creeping their way in as well, some of which is getting AI powered. So, how does one balance as a consumer, as a business, and even as a regulator, this idea of, okay, once the friction disappears in content creation or highly personalized content creation, who's going to set these guardrails, and how should marketers think about it?
Sure. A couple of ways to think about just the overall approach to generative AI. The book that my co-author and I are writing, our tentative title is called Threats, Bets, and No Regrets, about how to create a transformational generative AI strategy amidst all this uncertainty. So many things are still happening. I mean, OpenAI just yesterday announced a huge amount of product and service announcements that are going to be revolutionizing how these tools are used. So, hair on fire again on Monday morning. The way I think about it is you've got to think about the threats first. So you talked about some of the downsides of this. Some of them are being done by bad actors. Anybody with these tools where English is not even their native language can now be a really effective marketer, spam marketer, creating deepfakes. I created a deepfake of myself using content that was generated from my own private LLM with my data, with my voice. Translated into Japanese, put it into 11 labs. So it was my voice speaking it in Japanese. I do not speak Japanese, and it's beautifully said. And put up against a headshot of myself. So 5 minutes snippet from a live stream, a publicly available headshot, took me 5 minutes, 75 cents of processing power to make a deepfake of myself. So this is readily available to anybody. I don't even know how to code, by just piecing these little pieces together. And so you've got to play defense about anticipating some of these nefarious actors who could be coming in and doing very effective phishing campaigns inside your organization. I mean, humans are the weakest link in all of this. And thinking about the regulatory aspect of the world. Last week, the White House came out with guidance on how to think about the safety and security and innovation around generative AI. So lots changing. But at the same time, well, you have to think about the threats, at the minimum, have some guidelines of what your organization can and will do with generative AI. A recent survey of CIOs found that only 38% had even put in guidelines yet. And a good 43% were doing nothing at this point. We're just beginning to think about it. So I really encourage people to think about the threats so you can stay safe, know what's possible, know what the nefarious actors are doing, and get some of those foundational policies and trainings in place in your organization so you can not worry about the threats anymore and you can focus on the bets that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the same rollout of a bunch of additional features with ChatGPT, they added on what was already there in Microsoft and Bard's case, which was the indemnification element, right, with regards to whether there would be potential copyright infringement litigation with regard anything that came out of their LLMs. So that had been something that had been scaring the bigger players away, because obviously deep pockets mean you're a target if you end up creating something using an LLM, and then somebody decides to target you. So that's another area where obviously it's going to have to shake out as to, how much inspiration can an LLM use when creating what looks like a masterpiece painting that is very much like Picasso, versus a human painter saying, I'm going to paint something that looks sort of like in the style of Picasso, and which one of those steps on toes more.
Right. Well, again, images are a whole area. And again, you're seeing people come out and indemnify you. We have people like Canva who are using DALL-E 3 built into their programs. So it's easy to go and generate content because they know that they have rights to the original content that's being created on. So it's quote clean, and you'll be protected in using that. What I find interesting, some marketers and their agencies are now taking all of their marketing materials, putting it into a private database. Sometimes they call it fine tuning. OpenAI just announced that you can do these custom GPTs. I have one, it uses in Dante. There's a whole slew of platforms that can do this. But some of the agencies I've seen do is they take every piece of content that they have and they use that to write new content. So they know 100% it's being written off the company's strategy, their documents, their positioning, their brand, their tone, their voice, everything is 100% guaranteed to be their own. So they're using the logic of the GPT engines, of these LLMs, the logic, but the content that is being trained on is 100% from the company. And so that gives, I mean, this is I think the real future of these private large language models that are trained specifically on your data. And again, being creative with your tone, your voice, your content. You would use one set of words, not another set of words to describe your product.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Where are some other areas you expect to see innovation within AI? Obviously, it's one of the few areas of the startup ecosystem at the moment that's getting funded. But at the same time, there's going to be sort of a shakeout. Not everybody is going to survive. And a lot of them are building on top of each other's product. In the meantime, open source LLMs are sort of being released, where you may scratch your head and say, well, why not I just use that open source LLM?
Right. I really, again, it's a really vibrant ecosystem, but it's still really early. And I'll use the examples of these companies that are building these custom GPTs for you, because right now, if you don't know how to code, it's really difficult. But then OpenAI comes out and says, we're going to make it so easy that any mom and pop can set up their own custom GPTs with no coding, basically doing what these companies are doing. So their entire business model just went out the door, similar to how Google, Facebook, Amazon see something thriving, they're going to take it and bring it into their own offerings too as well. So that's always been a danger of being a startup. But I think I was recently at a startup event, AI event in Silicon Valley, right in the middle of Palo Alto. And there was an AI to generate blueprints for companies, one focused on solopreneurs, another one focused on health and taking all the information and providing coaching, another one actually being a coach. I mean, it goes on and on. I mean, the ecosystem is really thriving because you can see how generative AI can be used in almost all aspects and start transforming the way we do work, the way we live, the way we play. And so for marketers, I think if you're not using it every day, you better start using it as much as you can and to explore how can we really transform the way we work, and don't use it like a glorified search engine. Really think about the work that you would completely change the way you're doing things today if you have this incredible tool at your disposal.
Yeah, the other thing, obviously, as a sort of marketing mad scientist myself, I'm super excited because my coding teams are telling me that they can code 3 times faster when they have some form of copilot, whether it's the regular copilot or some other form of AI, assisting them in completing and bug testing code. And that's great from a startup ecosystem because it allows a smaller number of coders to create final products so much more quickly. Because there's process losses when you're building technology, that the more coders you add does not actually increase your speed of deliverable that much faster. You have these process losses that come from that, even in a Scrum environment. So I'm super excited to see that stuff happening.
Yeah. The research is showing now that the gains coming from coding, from writing, from image creation, all those things, yes, it's a lot less time. But what you're finding is people are able to do a lot more and things a lot better. Some research done by some business school professors found, and they did a fake project with BCG, the consulting company, and they took the bottom half of people on performance levels, because they have all these gradings and everything, and gave them these tools and found that they were 43% more effective. They just went from the bottom performers into like this middle group, like literally overnight with ChatGPT. Whereas the top performers also increased, but at a lower rate at 17%. So they got better, but I mean, it was a lot of closing the gap. And some organizations I've been talking with from my research said that we don't expect to lose anybody. We're getting all these gains, but it's about getting people to be more effective, reducing the onboarding time, creating a higher level of proficiency and performance. And that allows everybody to do more. What we're seeing right now is this really unique time where the gains are not necessarily just going to go through the bottom line. I mean, of course, you could do that. And any good CFO is going to say, what do you mean you're not going to get rid of people? We can cut our costs. But when else have you been able to grow, to transform your organization, to launch new products and services without adding people, without spending a huge amount of money, and in a fraction of the time?
Yeah,
So
it's super exciting.
it's incredible, right? So the companies who were early on, who again started putting together their AI councils, putting their strategy back in December, they could see that this was going to have a big impact on their organization, which is why I call it the big bets. Now, we've talked about the threats, but you also have to think about the big bets. And a lot of organizations are still going around going, I don't know, can I really justify this? Is this really too early? Things are constantly changing. Oh my goodness, Microsoft Copilot's going to be so expensive. It's $30 a person a month. How do we justify that? And we're looking at it from an enterprise technology point of view versus a transformational strategic point of view. If you could look at it, so the way I think about the big bets is start with your purpose, start with your values, start with your business strategy, because those things are not going to change. And then think about how generative AI is going to support those three things or potentially challenge them. So we all have a competitive advantage built into our strategy where we think our bets are going to be. So go and look at those things, look at the big things that generative AI can do and put all of your efforts into those pilots. Don't even do experiments, just pilot them. Because one of them will stick and it'll have a huge impact versus, I don't know, can I do copywriting a little better? It's going to have an impact, but it's not going to have a huge impact on your business.
You make a great point that people have to be experimenting now because everything's changing and it's changing really quickly. Having been in SEO since before Google was founded, of course, everybody's asking me how should they think about future-proofing their visibility, not necessarily in a search engine results page, but as more and more queries are answered by an LLM, where no longer are they selecting from a search engine results page, but the consumer is just asking for, what are the best luxury hotels in Orlando and getting a list from an LLM. I've been explaining to them that LLMs are ingesting all this content from all these different places, and much in the way that in the PageRank algorithm, which was the foundation of Google when they were founded, that votes from lots of places counted in your benefit as a domain. In this case, citations and mentions and all sorts of positive things from a digital PR perspective are going to influence the LLMs into being more likely to choose you when a question is asked relating to what it is that you do or the problem that you solve, et cetera. And, what's great is that future-proofs the SEO. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that from the perspective of how quickly consumers will move to sort of accepting the LLM answers instead of looking at a SERP and controlling their own.
I think you're already seeing it because it is fantastic for doing background research. Instead of having to dig through a gazillion links, it just gives you the answer.
Right.
There's a question of whether we're going to get, quote, lazy in terms of doing this. And I'm like, I think it's okay. We get lazy because we're letting ChatGPT do our writing and everything for us. I'm like, how many people know how to read a map anymore? Is that laziness? Or is that an advancing of the technology to take over a fairly tedious task that we just weren't very good at, right? Versus somebody just tell us, take a right turn, take a left turn. So I there's a bit of a curmudgeon that says, we should be able to do these things still. And it's a good skill to have. But I think also the realist optimist in me says, this is going to be the best thing. I mean, as a researcher, when I saw this come around, I'm like, this is fantastic. And this is terrible. I'm going to be out of a job because no one's going to ask me for any answers. They can just go to ChatGPT. So the game has just gotten harder. If you want to come up with really interesting, original ways of thinking about things, then you can't just go to the search engines and just regurgitate something, because people would have had the answers,
Right.
From a lot of these tools.
Well, I've certainly seen some interesting, I guess they call them AI or LLM hallucinations, although some people call them delusions. My wife, who's a psychologist, said it's not a hallucination, it's a delusion. But, I've seen some pretty interesting ones. I did some research once relating to sort of, some previous litigation, and the stuff that came back was outright wrong. It was just, and so I think if people do get lazy, you'll have to be careful about the decisions you're making based on sort of the stuff that gets spit out of LLMs. Now they'll get much better, quite quickly, but right now, I think I would be careful about making healthcare decisions and a bunch of other critical decisions based on something that an LLM spits back.
Right. And again, it's like a really smart college graduate who's going to give you all this base research. But it's a college graduate, it's not going to be perfect, which is why, again, these private LLMs, these custom fine-tuned LLMs to a particular purpose is where I think it's headed. I don't want to talk to a general purpose engine. I want to talk to one that's finely tuned on the latest research across all sorts of disciplines around health to give me advice on that. And I may want a very specific perspective that integrates Western and Eastern medicine. Or somebody else may want, I just want only Western medicine, like vetted like crazy, and I'm going to fine tune things to those different things. So this is why prompts are so important, what you put into the prompt for the chatbot. And in particular, how you set the context. What are you looking for? Giving it the appropriate context. And I just saw a really interesting piece of research that said if you put emotion into the prompt and the emotional intelligence of the LLM will understand that this is important to you, it will give you 10% on average better results. And the only difference in prompt was the answer is really important to my career. That was it. That was the only a prompt with that and the prompt without it. And the prompt with the fact that, hey, this is a very important thing. It's important to my career, tuned the AI to give 10% better results. That was the only difference.
So do you know
so
how
there's an emotional
quality?
Intelligence built into these things,
Yeah,
that understands the context of what's going on.
I'm curious, how did they grade the quality, if you happen to know? Who was the grading the level of quality increase?
So they took some test results, and it was a whole series. They didn't actually display what they were. And I just read it very quickly this morning. But they took some that were objective measurements, so
Right.
they could absolutely objectify it. And then they took ones that were subjective, and they put together a panel of humans who then rated those results to say whether they're better or not better.
Right. One interesting thing, you mentioned laziness, the potential for a quote laziness. And, we had the conversation with my teenagers about, driving cars, right? I mean, already my wife and I know how to drive stick shift, but nobody else in my family does, right? So that was like the first move into, automating driving, right? And now with self-driving vehicles that are powered off of AI for the most part, right? There will come a point perhaps where, do people bother to take a road test, right? Or do they just get into a vehicle and it takes them where they want to go?
Yeah, I live in San Francisco, and I take the Waymo cars. Have no drivers in them. And, it's a very interesting experience. I have a Tesla. And so I just push a button, and it'll parallel park. And so I have an adult child in the family who doesn't drive that much. And now is like, wait, I can't get that thing to turn on. I'm actually going to have to learn how to parallel park because I can't depend on it to always parallel park for me. It's like, yeah, it's a good skill to have as long as you're driving in a city.
Right.
So I look at this and say, we can think about all the things that could go wrong. We can think about the hallucinations. And as long as you are aware of them and anticipate them, that's fine. But that should not stop you from looking at what are the possible things I could do with this. I now have this magic wand, this incredible magic wand, that if I wave it, if I start using it over myself and my team members across my company, we suddenly are imbued with superhuman powers that we could never have imagined that we had. What are we going to do with those powers? And you don't even know because you've never experienced it before. Sure, I can lift the building, but why would I lift the building? Sure, I can go write entire chapters of a book, but why would I do that? And so there are different ways for us to explore. And we need to think about beyond the boundaries of how we think about our work, how we actually do things. We need to think from a transformational and exponential way. It's a very different way of thinking. Like, what if I could upload my entire strategy and have it evaluate what are the weak points of this against all my other competitors? What if I could upload my existing marketing plan and say, what are some opportunities that we may be overlooking in the marketplace? Go and size them and put them into a presentation that I can take to my executives. I mean, that's what these technologies can do now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're not using them in that way.
So one of the big areas of advertising over the next year, for those of us who live and breathe the advertising marketplace, is obviously political advertising. And in previous presidential elections, the influence of social media, as well as the influence of ad-boosted social media, ended up being fairly material, depending on who you ask. And so there's a big question mark as to the next year as it relates to advertising and media, where AI will fit in, either in a positive or negative context. And you mentioned deep fakes of yourself. And do you think that there should be a little bit more oversight by folks, just in sort of checking the veracity of things as potential deep fakes make their way into?
Yeah, I think deep
media
fakes are going to be
streams and
really
advertising?
difficult to pull off because these are public facing people. And the fact is that people have been putting words in people's mouths or taking things out of context for decades.
Yeah.
And it just continues. So it's just going to continue to happen. The real difference, I think, this time is that it's going to be much more targeted to a person, not just by geography, but to a person. Because if you know that certain districts, certain precincts are key to being swing districts in swing states, there are basically 6 states that really matter. And if you districts in each of them, and if you can target the issues to each person, I mean, that's what we can do now. We can literally walk up to a person's door and know exactly what to say in real time based on their responses, how to respond back to them.
Absolutely. So we have some interesting things going on. I'm not sure if you've been following it on the digital marketing side, where, in the open web, we're losing fidelity of targeting because the cookie have IDFA and then the erosion of the third-party cookie, which is already well on its way out the door, but there's sort of the final nail being put in the coffin soon. But then within other marketing channels, we still have the ability to do one-on-one or household level targeting like CTV. And to your point about hyper-personalizing messaging to the individual, to be able to do that, you need to have either their identity or just a really good profile of what kinds of messages will push their buttons. Do you see sort of a inherent tension between sort of the privacy side and being able to sort of protect people's privacy while also delighting them with highly targeted advertising? Let's assume the advertising is being used for good as opposed to for evil.
Well, again, if I could control what messages I see, I do want to see messages for the things that I care about and want. Right. And I also want the people who I already bought from to go away because I already made my decision. I mean, the perfect relationship would be that the marketer, the advertiser, understands now is not a good time to be talking to you because I'm not in a decision-making process. So how do I understand when it's time to be quiet, and let alone the time to be saying something? Because I will value the fact that you're leaving me alone and that you're showing up at just the right time versus bombarding me every single week. Buy more shoes. I have enough shoes. Thank you very much. So just because I bought one doesn't mean I'm going to buy another one next week. And yet I get multiple emails a week from the same shoe company. I'm like, why are you doing this? So it's like, I just went to Trader Joe's. I don't need to hear from Trader Joe's because I just went there yesterday. You should know that I just went, and now, that my frequency is about every 5 days. So reach out to me the day before I usually go.
Right.
So this is a utilitarian aspect to this, to understand right time, place, person, and the message. But taken to a level now when third-party cookies are no longer there, you're really relying on first-party data. And having people give you the information because they want to, and to have a different type of relationship with people is a really interesting way. And I think in some ways, this is where blockchain is going to become very interesting. We're a long ways away from this, but think about all the transaction data that I have, like all of it, not just what's on Amazon and not just what's on credit cards, because that only tells you the purchase level, not the items. If I were to give you all of that data, I would want to control that and have you use it only for certain things that are going to help me, that I want. So using blockchain to understand who has permission to use what for what purposes is going to be a really interesting development, where I can blockchain all of my content and information before it goes out. So user control of that data and decentralized completely. Again, far off in the future, I think, until we can actually do that. But I think generative AI is actually going to allow us to be able to control that, because we have an understanding of what data we're generating, be able to categorize it, put a blockchain against it, and then say to marketers, if you want this, then here's the deal.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly aspirational. There is a bunch of money flying into that category, especially now that vector databases are also available, because vector databases are particularly good at understanding relationships between, one product and another product, or one service and another product, another service, and the opportunity to light the consumer is stronger, right, as a result of that. And when you think about what we have now, which is back-end systems that might just know I'm almost out of a consumable, and therefore it will wait and remind me just before I need to reorder. That's great, right? And that is much better than your point earlier of where it should know, the marketer should know, since they have a first-party relationship with you, that you're not looking to buy what you just bought yesterday. There's an opportunity to build stronger brands through better messaging, as opposed to weakening your brand by annoying your customer.
Right. And this is where the autonomous agents are really interesting. So autonomous agents that are ones that act on your behalf across multiple steps. So think about booking a trip right now. If you want to go book a trip, you have to figure out the location, the deals, and the airlines, and the hotels, and the travel. It is a total pain in the butt. And that's what travel agents used to do for you, is that they would take care of the whole thing. And now we're seeing these agents come in and be able to do that. I was playing with one earlier this year where I was planning a trip. And like I said, lay out all the places I can go around New Zealand. And this was for my son, and find hostels and, plan out an itinerary for 2 weeks. And then it said, and it did all the things, all the steps. And then it said, hey, by the way, I noticed that you don't have ways to get between these places. So I've assigned myself 2 new tasks, look at the various options, and then assign the ones that most best utilize an efficiency of time versus the cost of which are your best options. So put those in there. Again, an autonomous agent acting on my behalf. I never gave it that task, but it could figure out that this was a missing piece and that should be in there. So imagine that person, that agent has access to all of your data, is acting on your behalf and reaching out to marketers saying they're about to run out of laundry soap, even though they didn't buy it from you or through a retailer that you know about. It's time to actually do it. Do you have anything on offer for them? What would it take for you to give them an offer? This is a valuable person. Here's their entire history. What would you like? And then we'll take back that data.
Yeah, what's interesting is in the pitches by companies who are starting to build some of this stuff, because I do some angel investing, questions I've asked them is, doesn't this essentially drive price to the bottom? Is it like a race to the bottom at that point? Because everyone will instruct their autonomous agents to wait until it reaches some threshold of a special deal. It's sort of Sunday newspaper coupons on steroids, right? Because part of the problem with price differentiation in the Sunday coupons was some people would only buy Tide when it was on sale, but it was a little bit of a hassle. So there was some friction in remembering to look at your FSIs and see if there was a Tide coupon in there. And then coupons went digital. They got a little bit easier. And then now there's Honey and Rakuten and other apps that will go out there and find you coupons in real time. And the next step is the autonomous agent, right? And so does that essentially drive down brand value and margin? Any thoughts on that?
It could potentially for that person, but you could also think about it as a very different and special relationship where that person actually values access to different things, maybe not so easily on laundry detergents, but to a particular brand that has special offerings, limited editions for something that may not cost more, but is exclusive to somebody who is consistently engaging in that loyal relationship.
Right.
I mean, it's a difference between loyalty and price, because if you're loyal, but I can count on you, I'll take that to the bank every day. I'll give you a discount to a point. Mm-hmm. Versus constantly having to switch. And at what point are you no longer loyal and you're just going for the bottom dollar? So again, generics become an issue, but you can always buy a generic. You're paying a premium for Tide.
Right.
So again, I think of this all shaking out in the end because you reach an equilibrium between what people are willing to pay and what brands are willing to offer. There's a point where they just won't go any further. Mm-hmm. And consumers will not pay any higher. And you reach that, again, demand supply equilibrium. Always has been, always will be.
Yep. I think that what helps me frame it is really just an additional removal of friction with regards to price, right? Is if you sort of think about the Amazons and Walmarts of the world is, used to be hard to figure out, what the other prices were for things. And friction's been eroded out of the marketplace to a great extent. Even for gas stations, there are now apps that will tell me if it's 4 cents cheaper if I drive an extra 4 blocks. So the frictionless element of that, if you add an autonomous agent onto that, it really, it does almost all the remaining heavy lifting for you. So it's super exciting.
Yeah. So I just talked about the threats and the bets, and the third categories are the no regrets. And these are the moves that you just know are just going to be good, like, copyright. So it's, again, keeping in mind hallucinations or other things. There's just some things that you just go, there's going to be no regrets about this. Mm-hmm. But it also is indicating just a sort of moment that's fraught with anxiety that I don't know what the future looks like. Am I too early to make a decision? Am I going to regret something that I do today? We all have memories of e-commerce where we went out and set up all these stores and realized, oh no, we don't have it back in. I really regret not setting this up a certain way. And so how do we make sure we don't have any regrets? And I keep coming back to this whole research I did around the psychology and around culture of disruption and the leadership aspects of disruption too, as well. It's just really messy. Mm-hmm. And if we think it's going to be this nice, smooth path with clear budgets and timelines, you've got to be kidding yourself. It's going to be just awful messy. You're going to be backtracking constantly on things. But if you have a pretty good idea what you're trying to achieve and you're focused on that with your big bets, I guarantee you will not have any regrets. And in fact, the only regret you'll have looking back is that we didn't go faster, we didn't go sooner.
Right. Well, that's all great advice strategically for companies as they embrace AI, either wholeheartedly or tiptoeing in at their own speed. But I do agree that they'll have to be a little bit comfortable with mess.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Charlene, for joining me. Great conversation. And looking forward to continuing the conversation at Techonomy.
Right. See you there.
Kevin Li's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.